289, and the nays are 137. The bill is passed.
The House overwhelmingly votes to shut down the flow of Syrian refugees. We will talk to two South Florida congressmen on opposite sides of this issue.
They're going to be pouring in. We don't know who they are. Could be ISIS.
The rhetoric on the refugees. It's now an election issue, and it's getting ugly.
Another student from one South Florida high school is gunned down. What will it take to stop the carnage? We'll take that question to the roundtable.
We have a lot to talk about this morning. Good morning and welcome. So great to have you with us.
We do have a jam-packed show for you, including a live report from Hatzell Villa in Costa Rica at the camps that are sheltering Cubans, a couple of thousand of them trying to reach the United States.
We begin, though, with a subject just as personal to South Florida, refugees, this time Syrians. President Obama had agreed to take in 10,000 people fleeing Syria's brutal civil war and violent rise of ISIS.
More than 700,000 Syrians have already reached Europe seeking refuge and asylum. But reports that one of the Paris attackers was a Syrian jihadist who had traveled to Europe hiding among legitimate refugees has raised fears that ISIS is placing agents among the refugees.
And of course, that prompted the House of Representatives to vote Thursday in favor of a bill that prevents Syrian refugees from entering the U.S. until they've been thoroughly screened.
Congressman L.C. Hastings voted against that bill. He is a Democrat from Broward who represents the 20th Congressional District. Congressman Carlos Curbelo voted in favor of the bill restricting the flow of refugees. He is a Republican. He represents the 26th Congressional District, much of Southwest Miami-Dade and the Keys. Gentlemen, great to have you come in this morning.
Thank you. Good being with you.
Congressman Curbelo, you voted for this, as we said. Why did you? Why do you believe it's necessary?
Michael, I believe we need to help these refugees, and I have been talking about this for months. What we have voted for in the House is to pause the program, to make sure that our law enforcement agencies have all the resources they need to vet these refugees and to get the FBI involved. We know the FBI is very good at background checks, at vetting.
Are they not involved in the vetting that's going on right now?
Well, this gives them an official role in the process. And by the way, in large part, it's a response to Director Comey's comments that we cannot fully vet a lot of these refugees. So we want to help the refugees, but we want to make sure we keep the homeland safe at the same time.
Can I just clarify what my understanding in reading the bill is the vetting process doesn't change. There are just 3 people who need to now sign off of it. Homeland Security Secretary, the FBI Director, and the Director of National Intelligence. 3 signatures.
That's right.
Is what changes.
We don't want this to just be a bureaucratic decision. We want it to be a leadership decision, and we want the administration to go on the record saying that if we let the refugees in, which I think we ultimately should, that the American people are going to be safe, and that none of these refugees are like the terrorist who allegedly came through the refugee trail in Paris.
All right, Congressman Hastings, as you well know, Syrians who already are in the pipeline takes 18 to 24 months for them to get through the screening process. This would add even more time for them to be screened, wouldn't it?
It effectively shuts the program down. I understand my colleagues' views, but he didn't say how we got into this. First off, the process stunk. Let me just be blunt about it. And what happened is it did not go through what we call regular order. There were no hearings. There was no markup. It just came out of the blue. 6 committees of jurisdiction evidently put it together with the new Speaker of the House, and it was brought to the Rules Committee. I raised substantial sand about that. But the simple fact of the matter is there are 2,184 Syrian refugees in the United States of America today. All of them were vetted by either 2 years or 3 years for some, including about 20 that were scheduled to be in the United States that were rejected by some of the governors. Please understand this. Not one of those people that has been in the United States that period of time has committed anything near a crime. Not to mention the number of other immigrants. Remember this, 53 million immigrants have come to the United States of America since 1965. The 786,000 people that have come here during the Syrian period, only 3 have been charged with anything related to terrorism. This is crazy.
I will say, I agree
Yeah.
with Elsie that the process to bring the bill to the floor was not ideal, but I think the legislation is reasonable, and the proof is in the fact that 47 Democrats, who had met, by the way, with the White House Chief of Staff and with Jay Johnson, the Homeland, the Secretary of Homeland Security, voted with Republicans. We actually got a veto-proof majority in the House of Representatives. Now it goes to the Senate, and again, you know, we are a community that's full of refugees in South Florida. I want to make that point. We need to help these refugees. We just want to make sure that none of them are coming here to hurt us.
Michael and Glenna, I know you want to get in this, but let's localize this for a minute. Michael, you and I have been involved with Haitian and Cuban refugees for a substantial period of time.
Right.
I issued the order that allowed 22,000 Haitians to have work permits in the United States of America when I was a judge. I issued the order that allowed fishermen and others who own boats that were Cubans to go to Cuba when Carter said that they could pick up their refugees. You're looking at the guy that entered that order, and I did so proudly. There's absolutely no reason for the grandstanding that went on last week. It's pure, unadulterated political rank politics, and it's wrong.
All right, we are going to hold on, Congressman. We're going to take just a brief pause because I've been told by our producer that there is I believe, a tornado watch has been issued, and Jennifer Correa is standing by to tell us about it. Jennifer, what's going on?
Yes, Michael, it's actually a tornado warning has been issued for portions of Broward County. It was just issued. This includes Weston and even Sunrise. It is due to the leading edge of these thunderstorms that are moving towards the east. As you can see, heavy downpours associated with this. Now, this tornado warning will be in effect until at least the storms pass through. So at least for the next 15 minutes, we're talking about tornado warning, which includes Weston, Sunrise, even Plantation, so central portions of Broward County. And again, we're tracking these thunderstorms. We expect some rotation with these cells. Funnel clouds are definitely a possibility, but the more major impacts are the gusty winds and, of course, the heavy downpours. We're talking about rainfall falling at least 2.5 inches per hour. We have the tornado warning until 12:15 this afternoon. And again, it will be tracking on eastward. A lot of lightning strikes associated with this. I will keep you posted throughout the show.
All right, Jennifer, I know that you and the weather team are watching it, and come back and join us if you have further developments. But for now, let's take a pause in this discussion with these two congressmen. We'll be back in just a minute.
We are back talking about the U.S. response to Syrian refugees with Congressman Alcee Hastings and Carlos Curbelo. And just to follow up on what we were talking about in the last segment, I think that the biggest concern that we're hearing that this is the SAFE Act is a response that's more political than practical, is that the concerns that all of the people involved in the Paris attacks were citizens there. They were not Syrian refugees. And to the congressman's point, there has been no Syrian refugee or any other refugee here that has perpetrated an act of terror. And so what makes this not political?
Right. Well, that's why we're not canceling the program. We're just asking for the program to be paused and for the government to go on record certifying that these people are not going to be threats to the homeland.
Carlo, can you certify that your next door neighbor isn't going to commit harm at some point in the future?
Alcee, that's far different from this terrorist threat. The American people are scared, and some are ridiculing the American people for being fearful, for being concerned. These are legitimate concerns. The President of the United States is out there ridiculing those who are concerned about this, when in reality, if we really cared about the Syrian people, what we would do is defeat and destroy ISIS, something the President has refused to commit to.
Then put your plan on the board.
That is the ultimate
Put your
solution.
plan on the board without just saying
it. It's an authorization of use for military force that will give the President every tool to defeat ISIS, and one that he does not want.
Answer me this question. Why is it that Iraq is included in this particular legislation? The Iraqi situation is one where we have had a significant number of Iraqi refugees to come here. But that isn't mentioned by my colleague, that Iraq is also part of it. And then let me go a step further. Why not Sudan? Why not Yemen? Why not Nigeria, where Boko Haram has been taken? Why not Mali now? We're going to go back next week and we're going to say that people from Mali can't come here? How about Libya? I could go on and on and on.
The world changed after 9/11. The world changed
I
again
agree with
after
that.
the Paris attacks.
Yeah.
A lot of people are concerned, and a lot of Democrats joined Republicans to support this reason.
Who also panicked and were hysterical, and I was there, I saw them, and it's shameful. It's against our values. It's against everything that this country stands for. Nicholas Kristof in today's New York Times says the Statue of Liberty must be crying.
Can
At
we
the
just
end of the line,
provide,
just one more point, please. We are the country that most supports refugees in the world. We invest millions and millions of dollars. We should not tell our people that all of a sudden we're not being generous and that we're rejecting these refugees. We're not. We're putting a pause in the process. And by the way, we're going to continue spending billions through the UN to help these refugees wherever they are.
Just for
Carlo,
point
you're
of,
stopping
just
the process.
point of
It's not pausing.
information.
Yeah. Oh,
May-
you all are here, are you?
vaguely.
We're not a potted
Just
palm
a point
here.
of information, how South Florida, the congressional South Florida delegation voted along party lines.
How did they? I don't
Ileana
remember.
Ross-Layton and Mario Diaz-Balart. Congressman Curvello voted for it. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Lois Frankel, Congressman Hastings, Ted Deutsch, and Frederico Wilson voted against, but Gwen Graham and Patrick Murphy, Democrats of Florida, voted for.
Sure.
What do you make of that?
What I make of it is people worried about their own politics and thinking because of the fear in this country. Let me make it very clear. There is a legitimate reason to be concerned about terrorism. But there's a greater reason than what we just did to be concerned about visa waivers and student waivers. The people that blew down the Twin Towers, each one of them were here on a waiver
And we're
or
gonna
tourist.
be moving legislation that I think
see.
you're
Well,
gonna support
I'll be there when you move it.
What is that legislation?
It's essentially going to impose some restrictions to the visa waiver program because, as Alcee says, a lot of the people who have done harm to this country arrived here legally, and we need to take a look at that as well.
All right, Congressman Hastings, I need to ask you this. The president has said, President Obama, several times after these horrific attacks in Paris, condemned them, but said, we have a plan to attack ISIS. We've got a coalition. We'll form a broader coalition, but we've got a plan, and we're sticking to it. Now, among others, I saw Peggy Noonan, the wonderful writer, Wall Street Journal columnist, former Reagan speechwriter, said in her column yesterday in the Wall Street Journal that the president is wrong and he's irrelevant. What do you think?
I think that the president has not acted as I would have acted in many respects. When he commented the day before the Paris attacks that ISIS was contained, obviously, it demonstrably was shown to him that it was not. But there's a bigger issue going on here. At the United Nations, day before yesterday, the French and the Russians offered a resolution to form that kind of coalition and condemn what transpired. Interestingly, Russia did not proceed with their resolution and supported the French resolution, which is unusual because they and China normally veto, but they didn't.
Putin wants to, is that the signal that you see, Congressman, that even Vladimir Putin wants to get on board? I mean, it was, after all, the airliner was blown up. ISIS says we put the bomb on that plane.
It is clear that the President of the United States, his administration, from the beginning did not take ISIS seriously. There was a major point of inflection in 2013 when Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons against his own people. At that time, I was running for Congress. It was not a popular position, but I said the United States must act. Why? Because we drew a red line, and we said that that would not be allowed. The President of the United States dithered, sent the message that the United States does not care about what's happening in Syria, and I think that is why we are where we are today. That's why it bothered me so much to hear the president attack Republicans and Democrats who supported this legislation, saying that we didn't care about the Syrians, that we were mean, that we weren't thoughtful, yet he stood idle while Syrians were gassed by their own leader, who is a head of state recognized by the United Nations. That was a low point in U.S. policy, and had we not acted irresponsibly at that point, maybe we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
I guess we
today.
could. My mom used to say that we could always go back. I guess we kind of ignored the fact that Iraq was left with the void that
that
these
was a
people
mistake as well,
filled.
and probably the Iraq invasion was a mistake as well. We gotta be fair.
Is there a legitimate question about intelligence? A couple of the presidential candidates, the poll toppers, are both saying we should go back to the enhanced interrogation, which a lot of people considered torture. Is there something about U.S. intelligence that should be attended to? Because that's the proactive, not
Just
the reactive.
remember something about intelligence, and I served 8 years on that committee over a period of 10 years. You don't know what you don't know. And to argue that there's a need for enhancement of intelligence, particularly coming from either Donald Trump or Ben Carson or some of those leaders, what we need in this country is for us to recognize that it is a time for us to be serious. And whatever this garbage is that these people are talking needs to be thrown in the garbage can.
All right. Before we run out of time, Congressman Curbelo and Congressman Hastings, I need to ask you, there are about 2,000 Cuban migrants who are stuck in Costa Rica. They can't get across the Nicaraguan border, and thanks to the generosity of private individuals and the Lions Club and other people, they are eating and they have some shelter. But this just cannot go on. Now, you've written a letter to the White House. What do you want the administration to do?
Well, last week, before I did that, I met with a Costa Rican ambassador, and we asked him to please make sure that these people are taken care of and that they are treated humanely. And Costa Rica is being very responsible and charitable with those Cubans. But I wrote a letter to the White House that was preceded by a meeting with the White House over a month ago on this spike in Cuban refugees. Right. Since the administration announced its new Cuba policy in December of last year, there has been a 78% increase in Cubans fleeing the island. This has been a quiet crisis that has been building, and now everyone knows about it because of this border dispute between Costa Rica and Nicaragua. This is a serious issue. I have asked the administration for answers. What are they going to do? Who are they talking to? And also, this is an issue that shows that we need to reform our immigration policy towards
and maybe
Cuba
the Cuban Adjustment Act and wet foot, dry foot.
I would go a step further and say we just need to do immigration reform. I favor exactly what Carlos said, and perhaps he and I can legislate with reference to the Cubans that are in Costa Rica. But know this, we have always stood for freedom in this country. Our principles allow and our values allow that we are the beacon of freedom. Toward that end, I would only urge that all of us take a deep breath and get on about the business of ensuring the security of America and the rights of this country's citizenry.
Seems like the perfect last word.
I think that is the last word, and a very good one. Congressman Hastings, Congressman Curbelo.
Thank you all. Thanks, Carlo.
And as a matter of fact, when we come back, we are going to have a live report right there from Costa Rica, where those thousands of Cubans are stalled in their quest to get to the U.S.
Local 10's Hansel Villa is in Costa Rica. He will join us live next.
All right, South Florida in Broward County, we continue with this tornado warning. It remains in effect until 12:15 this afternoon. It includes Weston out to Sunrise, Davie, Tamarack, and even Plantation. Now, the threat continues to track towards the east. That's where we're seeing the heaviest downpours right now. This storm is moving at a rate between 25 to 30 miles per hour towards the east. And not only is there the potential for the possibility of a funnel cloud, but also gusty winds as high as 45 miles per hour with heavy downpours. So stay safe, stay indoors, and I will keep you posted as I continue to track the radar.
Jennifer, thanks. As we have been talking about those 2,000 Cubans trying to migrate to the U.S. through Central America, they are blocked right now at the Nicaraguan border.
That is where Local 10 News' Hansel Villa has been reporting from the border all week long, and he joins us now from Costa Rica with a look at the stalemate, the conditions these Cubans are living under. Hansel, good morning. Give us the latest. What's going on there?
Good morning, Michael and Glenna. I can tell you that this is one of the shelters where we have been reporting from. This particular shelter has about 400 Cubans. This is just one of many in this very tiny town called La Cruz, which is about 20 miles away from the Nicaraguan-Costa Rican border. There's other shelters around town. Just to give you a sense of the scope of this migration, the town that we are in has a population of about 6,000 people. Well, we're looking at 2,000 Cubans in this area. So the town has been somewhat overwhelmed about or from this migration that is taking place right now. Now, as you know, Costa Rica has been good to these folks and has given them, the government has given them a temporary visa which allows them to stay here in Costa Rica. Some of the concerns now, though, is that these visas are expiring, so a lot of these folks are starting to wonder what will happen to them now that the visas are expiring. One of the women we spoke to this morning was trying to figure out if the border folks or the immigration folks in Costa Rica will be coming to the shelters to, I guess, extend those visas because they're getting nervous and anxious as to what will happen in the next coming days. Talking about the next coming days, we understand that on Tuesday, 9 a.m. in El Salvador, several foreign ministers from Central American countries will be meeting to try to figure out how to handle the crisis and where these Cubans will go now, because as you know, Nicaragua is not letting them cross into their border, which we can talk about that further some more because you know the political conflict there between Nicaragua and Costa Rica.
Axel, I was going to ask you about that. If these Cubans are headed toward the United States, why is Nicaragua closing the border to them, and might there be U.S. involvement somehow here?
Yeah, the simple answer to that, Glenna, is the fact that Nicaragua has had a long border dispute with Costa Rica. So the thought is that Nicaragua closed the border in sort of, I guess, in protest against Costa Rica. We understand Costa Rica publicly talked about giving Nicaraguans visas. The Nicaraguans are saying that Costa Rica should not have done that, that they should have asked them first. Instead, Nicaragua went ahead and closed its borders sort of as a protest. But there's deep political implications with that because we understand, as you know, the two countries have long been foes and have had a debate between both of them over a piece of land on the border. So folks here think that it's more political than anything. And then let's also talk about the Nicaraguan government's relationship with the Castro government, a long-term relationship that they have. And a lot of folks here, especially these migrants, think that that's part of the reason this is happening.
Yeah, well, Daniel Ortega, the head of the Nicaraguan government, of course, is an old-style Sandinista, a socialist, maybe some would say communist, very close to Castro. Hetzel, I need to ask you, in your reporting this week, you've talked to a number, dozens, I guess, of Cubans who are there stuck in Costa Rica. And virtually, as far as I can tell, most of them have said, we're doing this because life in Cuba was terrible and we're afraid the Cuban Adjustment Act is going to be wiped off the books. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. You ask these folks why they're migrating, why they have left Cuba, obviously for mostly financial reasons. They say they simply cannot survive in Cuba the way their economic model is right now, and they're fleeing that, and they feel that this is the best way because fleeing by way of the sea is too dangerous. So because Ecuador allows them to come to that country without a visa, they go to Ecuador, make their way up through Colombia. A total of 8 countries they have to cross before getting to the U.S.-Mexican border, which is pretty risky. A lot of these folks talk about being held up. Mostly, they say, in Colombia. One of the things I found interesting is that they think that they are now being referred to as walking ATMs. At least that's what they've heard from the Colombian officials. That, according to the migrants here who say the Colombian officials call them walking ATMs because they know that Cubans are carrying a lot of cash as they make their way through South and Central America. And so obviously the reason they're fleeing is for financial reasons. They need to get out of Cuba. They say they don't see a better life in that country.
So if those visas from Costa Rica are about to expire, these people are about to become limbo, in no man's land, illegal. Is there an end game, or is that this Tuesday meeting is for?
And that's exactly what these Cubans are hoping, that by Tuesday, these folks can figure out, the governments in Central America can figure out what they're going to do. In the moment, or at this point, I feel like we have been being told that the Costa Rican government will be able to extend some of those visas so that these folks at least feel like they're safe here in Costa Rica while everybody else tries to figure out a solution. We have heard rumors, only rumors at this point, that Costa Rica is trying to figure out how to maybe fly them or put them on a boat and send them either to another Central American country or to eventually to Mexico so they can continue on their way to the American border.
Well, some resolution must be found. In the meantime, Hatzel, outstanding reporting from Costa Rica. We will count on seeing you later on Local 10 News today.
Hatzel, thanks. Wow, so much to take to the roundtable this week. Stay tuned and weigh in yourself along with this week's Powerhouse panel, and that is next.
This has been one of those weeks when we have all been bombarded by news, most of it troubling, sometimes tragic. And you may have wondered to yourself, I know I did, what in the world is going on with the world?
And trying to answer that question is exactly what Roundtable is all about. And with us this week, an engaged and active group of Roundtable veterans. Mary Lee Cancio is a Miami attorney with her own firm, Named, and a Republican Party activist as well. Marlon Hill, an attorney with Hamilton, Miller, Berthasell, and a broadcaster too. And welcome back to Katie Sorensen, who heads the Good Government Initiative at the University of Miami. And Katie is a former Miami-Dade County Commissioner. Welcome.
Great to have you all here. Good familiar faces and smart people as well. That's a nice combo. So, Mara Lee Cancio, let me ask you, is the vote in the House that we were talking about earlier a lack of compassion or common sense?
Absolute common sense, and I'm glad that it passed with bipartisan support. I left a copy of the act in the green room, but basically, if you read it, it's very short. And it just says that if you're from Iraq or Syria, or if you've been there since 2011, that you're going to go through a little bit more scrutiny. And 66% of the Americans are worried about safety and security. So there's nothing wrong with that. What's happening right now is that 10% of the population of Syria are Christians. Only about 2% of the refugees are Christians. So the whole process of the UN of selecting which refugees even get here is troubling. And there's nothing wrong with keeping America safe.
You know, my understanding is the UN list that's already done is 1,800 people, more than half of them are children. So might this hold that list already in process? That'll hold them up.
Well, we know we have a pretty good, strict vetting process already for refugees, and we just have to be very careful that we're not building a wall against our values as well in our policy. It's not always a good sign, and I'm sure Katie will tell us this, to make law in a very fearful and knee-jerk type of environment. So we have to be careful of that.
You have to be responding, not reacting. And the fact is, I mean, Fred Grimm pointed out in today's Miami Herald that 15 international visitors came to Florida last year. 15 million visitors came to Florida last year. And after minutes-long passport control, and you know, they came in with French and Belgian passports, and it was French and Belgian passports that were the terrorists in Paris. So it really, who are we really protecting, and how are we going to do it? And the other issue is we have to think about our history. We have to think about demonizing people, as we have done in this country, unfortunately, with the Japanese internment during World War II, with turning away Jews in 1939, and those things we look back on shame about. And are we going to repeat that and look back on shame in the future?
As a young reporter, I want to say I had a powerful experience of going to the Manzanar camp in California, which had a couple of thousand Japanese Americans, all U.S. citizens, and I did a story about then a woman who had been a little girl in what was essentially a prison, and President Roosevelt had done that for fear that these Japanese Americans were going to reach out, although there was no history of any of that happening.
And in fear, Michael, is a real emotion, you know, and our president really has to do a better job of calming down that anxiety and getting the help.
But how does he do that from Malaysia? Why didn't he, if I may say, fly back here in the wake of this tragedy in Paris and Mali and also Beirut, and we've had this cavalcade of awful events, and I'm not saying it's not important to be in Turkey and to be in Malaysia, but I think the president has been absent without leave.
I agree. I think that it was wrong for him to be over there. He should be here reassuring the people and exerting leadership, and it's a real problem. But I don't know if he views himself as a lame duck at this point, or if he thinks it's so impossible
He's acting like a lame duck.
Yeah, if he thinks it's so impossible to get anything done that he's above the fray. But we certainly need the leadership.
You know, to Mary Lee's point, there are, this week, a majority of Americans want attention to their safety. And here's my question. You watch cable news 24/7. I can't stop watching the news from Europe. Is the media complicit in fear-mongering? And how do we not be complicit in fear-mongering with that kind of news and events going on?
Absolutely, and there was a report today saying that the media wants a war, that they can't wait to start showing the war.
Who said that?
It was in CNN. We were in the green room. We all watched it together.
For the record, in this newsroom, that is not the case.
There is.
But there is that reality that it's good ratings, that some TV shows are made about violence and terror. But going back to what Carlos Curbelo said about visa waivers and Europeans coming without having to go through the scrutiny, I think that's going to have to be revisited, because truly, if in Europe you can have a European Community passport and you can come here without any scrutiny, that may have to change along with the new concerns in terrorism.
The European rules that allow inter-country travel among all the nations of the EU, they're going to have to revisit that too, it appears.
I'm sure they will, but we have to remember we've had 9/11 in this country, we've had the Boston Marathon in this country. It'll probably happen again. But we also have a lot of homegrown people. We have regular events every month, school mass shootings. We have, guns are so easily accessible in this country that we have regular events.
9/11 and Boston, those people were here legally by U.S. rules.
Listen, we depend on our parents to keep us safe. We depend on the transportation department to keep our roads safe. We depend on the superintendent to keep our kids safe. And we depend on our government. People have lost a little bit of trust in who's supposed to keep us safe in different types of environments. So this type of anxiety is real. So we need to kind of get into an ecosystem where we can have more trust on the people who are responsible for keeping us secure.
Well, if we can kind of change the focus here a little bit to how this has become a huge issue, and it should be, for the presidential race in 2016. And especially the Republican presidential candidates, Marley, have said some things which I frankly think are pretty outrageous. Donald Trump has backed off, but earlier he said, yeah, I'd create a database of American Muslims. They'd have to have IDs that identified them, their religion, and I would surveil mosques. I mean, that doesn't add to, it only adds to people's anxiety. It does not relieve them.
I agree completely, Michael. Absolutely, those comments do not match my values. I believe that if you read the Constitution of the United States, you cannot do that, period.
Right.
But what he's doing is bantering to a certain segment of voters that will vote in the primary that he's speaking directly to. Yeah. That's not me, that's not you, but there's a segment of this population that is listening to him, as we've seen in the poll numbers where he continues to lead.
Well, as a matter of fact, if we can, here are the latest poll numbers. We want to show you where this stands. According to a Washington Post ABC News poll that just came out yesterday, Donald Trump, who once seemed to be fading a little bit, is now leading with 32%. In second place, Dr. Ben Carson, 22%, Marco Rubio, 11%, Ted Cruz, 8%, Jeb Bush, fifth place with 6%. So, I mean, whether we think what Donald Trump is saying is outrageous, Marlon, there are a lot of people who think that it's good.
William Donald Trump is a master at tapping into the American psyche and the present state of our mind. I mean, I was in a room at the Miami Book Fair yesterday with Joby Warwick from the Washington Post, and you could not find any seating in terms of the rise of ISIS. So this anxiety and this fear of the unknown, fear comes from the unknown. So we need confidence in our security. And he's tapping into this fear and anxiety, and it's going to spill over into 2016.
But back to history, remember Joe McCarthy in the 50s, the communist scare and the communist threat? Donald Trump reminds me so much of Joe McCarthy and the impact that he's having on this country. And that's why we have to have leaders who know the intricacies of foreign policy, who really understand what's going on over there, who can make thoughtful proposals about foreign policy, but his is not it. He does, and Ben Carson needs to get schooled on it, and he's not catching on fast enough.
Well, one of Ben Carson's top foreign policy advisors said this week that he is basically clueless on foreign policy and he can't be instructed. Well,
he said something very similar when he was here. Quick break, we will be right back. We are back with the roundtable. Cannot get by a week this week that was so bloody in certain zip codes in Miami-Dade County. Mary Lee Cancio, you and I joined a meeting of mothers of murdered children this week before another young man was murdered Wednesday, before another shooting Friday, and a third shooting at a football game. Do you get the sense that somehow there's going to be a game changer event? Has this one been it?
I certainly hope so, but I'm still waiting for the press conference. I'm still waiting for the local leaders to raise their arms. I know that there's a meeting tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, but I'm still waiting for the local representatives, the local leadership to stand
Alberto,
up.
as you well know, Alberto Carvalho, the Miami-Dade School Superintendent, raises his voice all the time. I guess, Katie, what we are all saying here is let's hear some other voices, powerful voices in this community.
Right, but what are the solutions? We have this proliferation of guns that just doesn't seem to end, and lots of easy ways to get these guns, and you have undereducated, jobless, disaffected young males with too much testosterone who just have nothing to lose. I mean, they're almost like the jihadists, nothing to lose. And when you have nothing to lose, you take off and do these horrible things, and it is a community in terror and in fear. And I don't know what the solutions are, but I think part of the solution is some community policing that's really beefed up, and where there's some trust that you can develop between the police and the community, because that's really lacking, especially it's all over the country that it's lacking.
Well, you know, that fear, again, is very, very real right here in our community, right? You know, Bishop Curry will host a meeting, like Marilyn said, this evening with regards to moms who have lost their kids.
Tomorrow
At Monday at 7. Yeah. This issue is so something that we shouldn't even be stepping back from. Just like the president, we need a concerted, coalition, united effort against this type of violence. In order for Black Lives Matter, Glenna, to really have any resonance, people in the community need to care, and people outside the community need to care as well.
I will tell you, I see no lack of caring. I really don't. And I've been to community meetings, as we all have. I've heard the superintendent, I've heard pastors, many times the pastors each day talk about this. I've heard police who are out there every day. I saw them. We hear the politicians. There's no lack of caring. There's lack of action. To me, there is an emergency that nobody is addressing. There's a lot of talk and a lot of very good talk, but where are the proactive police officers that they used to have, those units, the jump out boys, TNT, that's been taken away.
Where's Al Sharpton? Where is Al Sharpton?
Where is Al Sharpton?
Some of the mothers were asking about that.
Bishop Curry.
You know, there's a wonderful police officer in this community in South Miami-Dade, Ron Tooks, who is just masterful at community policing. And if he could do a seminar for all the police, and he has achieved such great things in South Dade by getting into the community, establishing trust, and the whole no snitching idea, that doesn't happen in that community, but it's certainly happening in this community.
Well, in Liberty City, Overtown, and any area where there is a well-founded fear that you're going to be victimized, you will be shot, you may be killed if you tell what happened, if you know something.
It's totally unacceptable to go to a football game on a Friday night with your friends and to have shootings on the outside. If this shooting had happened at a football game in the middle of Coral Gables or something like that, would the urgency change? Right? It's just the same. You know, we have to do something about this.
Would the urgency change?
I think it would. Unfortunately, I think it would. I think the front page of the Herald today, I was expecting to see pictures of all the kids that have been shot this week. That's what I was expecting in the front page of the paper. Where was that? There was a little side story about the shootings on Friday. I think that we need to make that a priority. And unfortunately, it seems that it only matters when it's a police-involved shooting, or whether it's a person of a different race that shoots a black kid. That matters. And I think that all lives matter and that black lives matter, but we need to make it important all the time, not just when it's the police or it's a white person shooting a black person. No, because that's when we see it in the newspaper.
But black lives only matter, Marilyn, because it happens more often than not in those communities.
Right.
That's the reason why. This is what people need to understand.
Yeah, it's not happening in the white suburbs where I live. It's just not, those kinds of events just don't happen. Kids don't live in fear the way they do in the black community.
Well, and that is, the goal is that all kids can live safely and without these fears. Well, thank you. A great roundtable. Appreciate you coming in on this Sunday morning. Next, the terror threat is raised, not nationally, not officially, but in some South Florida neighborhoods. Glenna will have some comments about that.
All right, South Florida, that tornado warning that was in effect was canceled, so we're no longer a tornado warning, but I do want to show you this picture taken by Ashley Briggs. She tweeted it out earlier, and this was at the Publix shopping center at the intersection of Sterling and Flamingo Road. What looks like here is a shelf cloud and even what could have been a funnel cloud. Of course, this is not a confirmation. It was earlier. We don't have to now worry about that tornado warning, but we still have to worry about these heavy thunderstorms and showers that are still pushing through much of Broward County on the east side, and then behind it, plenty of rainfall that is lingering over west side of Broward County. Out ahead of this, spotty showers popping up from MIA to Miami Shores. We'll continue to see these showers popping up as long as we're out ahead of this cold front, so this wet weather is lasting even through this evening. We'll have a break at around maybe 5, 6 o'clock, but then it starts all over again, and then we'll be talking about the cool weather behind the front tomorrow morning, waking up in the 60s.
Jennifer, thanks. Terror and fear dominated the news this week, internationally and nationally, you know. Locally, terror and fear are at an all-time high in certain South Florida zip codes, spread by young people with grudges, guns, and the malevolent power that bestows.
They don't know what they do for a second.
No, they don't.
To our family that has lost a child.
There's nothing that you can say sorry for your loss, because you say sorry for something that you can take back, but you can't take this back.
This week, we heard it in the anger and grief of an increasing number of mothers who now live with unimaginable loss. Wednesday, another murder. A 15-year-old ninth grader shot on a street near his home. Friday, 2 others in front of another home. Hours after that, gunfire at this neighborhood football game. This is a kind of local, slow-motion domestic terrorism. The similarities are there. In fact, the FBI definition of domestic terror includes acts dangerous to human life intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population. Talk to the kids in the neighborhood. They are intimidated. They're frightened. They're convinced they could be the next victim. Paris happened, and resources poured into Homeland Security to shore up the safety of the people. Where is that take no prisoners kind of law enforcement pouring into this local state of emergency, the whatever it takes effort to save the next young person from another young person's bullet? To be sure, there needs to be some sociological shifts in the fabric of our community to break the cycle of violence. But somebody's got to staunch the bleeding first. What do you think? We invite you to weigh in on any topic you like. Email, Facebook, Twitter, any of these addresses. We are easy to find.
And we do respond when you talk to us. We are glad to talk back to you. And remember, as always, stay informed, get involved.
Have a great Sunday. See you next week.